It's time to take a look at what else has been making headlines this week with Kylie Moore-Gilbert, author and Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies scholar. Welcome back to Weekend Breakfast.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
First on this story that's been making global news this week, this copy on The Australia, that the meeting of dictators was not a summit of the equals, and that's certainly what we saw coming out in some of the public comments.
Yeah, I thought this was really interesting. The article opened by saying if he wasn't such a murderous dictator, you might actually feel a bit sorry for Vladimir Putin. I think humiliated is an interesting word to use here. President Xi of China, obviously this is the first meeting between the two since the war in Ukraine happened. And you could very much see through the rhetoric in the press conference afterwards that Putin was being forced to kowtow to the Chinese and to kind of go cap in hand and, I guess, beg for continuing support. Xi didn't mention Ukraine once, and there was plenty of chat about Taiwan, of course. But Putin did mention it several times and also brought up concerns that the Chinese had expressed about the war in Ukraine.
I wonder, Kylie, something that I took away from the article was the possibility that maybe Xi Jinping could be the key to pushing Vladimir Putin to end the war in Ukraine. Did you get that from the article as well?
I think that possibility is certainly there. It might be too early for the Chinese to make that decision, I think, but they have certainly, suffered economic consequences from the war just like everyone else. I mean, their food security is also of great concern to them. They also suffer from inflation. I don't think they're very happy about the war. And, the article says Xi doesn't like losers, and Putin certainly seems like a loser right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
The next story is in the ABC, and it's this report about the Australian government spending $2.5 million in taxpayer money on luxury accommodation that's linked to the military junta in Myanmar.
Yeah, this was quite a shocking story for me. We had heard a much lower figure, I think 800,000 in the past, but this came out in Senate estimates actually. Several hotels which are directly linked to funding the Myanmar junta, and not just the junta itself, but actually the body of them which purchases weapons and arms. So that's grave indeed. Shangri-La Hotel in Yangon, for example, and another hotel which has actually been linked, whose owners have been linked to funding the Rohingya genocide. $250 million of Australian taxpayers' money has been spent on accommodating embassy staff and Australian government dignitaries in these hotels in Myanmar.
2.5 million there.
Yes. And I mean, this comes at a time when we are actually one of the only Western countries which hasn't put sanctions on the Myanmar junta following the coup of last year. No Magnitsky sanctions, no financial penalties on companies who are, funding this murderous regime, which has actually killed thousands of its own citizens since that coup and imprisoned tens of thousands. So it's very concerning.
Kylie, I do wonder whether Canberra is in a very difficult position here in the way that it's, perhaps they don't want to engage with the military-led government in Myanmar, but at the same time, they do need to protect the Australian citizen, Sean, I think it's Sean Turnell, who's still in detention there. How would they walk that fine line?
It's a very, very fine line to walk, as you say, Fauzia. Sean Turnell is actually on trial right now. He was an economics advisor to Aung San Suu Kyi. He's actually a professor at Macquarie Uni here in Sydney, and he has been in prison since the coup, charged with national security offences, all bogus, of course. We consider him to be a victim of arbitrary detention, and he's on trial right now. The hope is actually that he could be deported following an almost certain conviction, and that could even happen within the next few weeks. It's widely believed the reason we haven't sanctioned the junta at all is because of Professor Turnell. I don't know morally, whether there is much of a case for that. Obviously, this is a murderous, tyrannical regime, and I don't know what Professor Turnell himself would think about that we're not penalising this regime at all simply because of him. I think it's a fine line and a very difficult one to get right. But that being said, 2.5 million in taxpayers' money going to the junta itself, I think is a step too far. There's a difference between declining to sanction them and actually giving them money, and that's what we've been doing.
Yeah, that's certainly a point to consider there. Kylie, let's move on to this other story, this BBC story. And I don't know, when I read it, the cynical side of me went, I don't know about this. It sounds a little fishy to me. This is about the founder of outdoor fashion brand Patagonia, and he's decided to give away his company to a charitable trust. Now, he claims that the profits will be spent on measures to fight climate change. What did you make of this? Were you just as cynical?
I mean, obviously, when you see this headline, your first response is, oh gosh, this is just, corporate social responsibility, quote unquote, a ploy for headlines. But actually, when you read into it a bit further, it does seem legit. Patagonia has a long established history of giving away lots of its profits to climate and environment related causes. And Yvon Chouinard, the American founder, if you look into it, he's giving 98% of all non-voting stock of the company away out of his hands and out of his control to an American foundation, which is, aiming to combat climate change. And he does seem to be, walking the walk as well as talking the talk. He's got a personal fortune of $1.2 billion estimated. And he's giving so much of that away that it really is quite astounding. And I think it speaks to a kind of an understanding now and a demand by the people too, that not just governments fix this problem of climate change, but companies and businesses have a huge responsibility to do so as well. And, often most of the big polluters are actually corporations rather than governments or individual citizens. So I think this is actually quite a sweet story. And I actually, reading into it a bit further, think that it's legit and it's not just a marketing ploy.
Yeah, well, they've updated their website. Earth is now our only shareholder. I think we'll be having more conversations about this. Academic and author Kylie Moore-Gilbert, thanks for your company.
Thanks so much for having me on.